Okay, so good evening. Yeah, and let's just get started. See what happens today. Yeah. So starting from the top as usual. Okay, dear Ajahn Brahmali, how has Ajahn Chah influenced your practice and understanding of the Dhamma? Okay, Ajahn Chah, gee, that's it's a bit far removed from me because I never met Ajahn Chah. He died. When did he die? 92, 91, something like that. And so I hadn't really arrived at Bodhinyana Monastery, and so it was kind of before my time. So it's one of those strange things. If you don't, some of these people, it's the contact that really matters. It's their presence. It's the kind of the felt experience of someone who is extraordinary. That is often much more important than the actual teachings. And it's like Ajahn Brahm, it's like seeing him in action that really is important to me. Being there, feeling the sense of peace, feeling the power of the mind of the person, understanding the kind of the benevolence, the kindness. But often it's just about feeling the atmosphere. It's like when Ajahn Brahm gives a Dhamma talk, sometimes there's this feeling of kind of peace that permeates the whole monastery, the whole hall. And you sit there, listen to him, and you become peaceful. Even if you don't want to become peaceful, you become peaceful. That's kind of nice, yeah. Even if you don't want to become enlightened, you become peaceful. And so that's kind of it's the presence of these people that to me is the most important thing here. In terms of the teachings of Ajahn Chah, I don't have a very close relationship with Ajahn Chah in that sense. I don't really read very much of the teachings that are given. And very often the feeling you have when you read these teachings of, various meditation masters, Ajahn Chah being one of the primary examples, is that it is often filtered through the person who translates and the person who chooses the teachings. Which teachings do you choose to translate in the first place? And so someone who is kind of into mindfulness, and this is a lot of people, they will choose teachings about mindfulness, or the teacher will teach teachings about restraint or whatever it is. So it depends on where you're coming from. And so it's very difficult to get the kind of rounded view of who Ajahn Chah was as a person. If I ask Ajahn Brahm who Ajahn Chah was, Ajahn Brahm will give a very different view than many other people of who he was. And so for that reason, I kind of given a little bit up on kind of getting to know individual teachers who are no longer there, focusing on those who are in existence, Ajahn Brahm, and then the Buddha, of course. That is kind of my mainstay. So, but I know, what I do know is that Ajahn Brahm praises Ajahn Chah very highly. And you may have heard that recently we had the 50th anniversary of Ajahn Brahm's monkhood at BSWA, and I had a short conversation with Ajahn Brahm, and I asked him some questions. And I asked him this particular question. I don't know if any of you heard that. I asked him, well, who is closer to you, the Buddha or Ajahn Chah? And he said Ajahn Chah. And that was kind of interesting here, because Ajahn Brahm has always been very keen on the suttas, or very keen on taking the Buddha as his primary teacher, and yet he feels that Ajahn Chah is closer because he knew him, because he's a living example. And I guess it's a bit like that with me and Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm has always been there, and I kind of know Ajahn Brahm, obviously in a very different way from the way I know the Buddha. It's a very different feeling. And so you can sort of understand that. But then as soon as they pass away, the Buddha comes back, and the Buddha is the mainstay. And because all of these other things are very impermanent. And so looking at Ajahn Brahm, he's looking more and more impermanent these days. You know what I mean? You kind of get this feeling of impermanence when you see him in various directions, especially the kind of this direction. And so because you have this feeling of impermanence, that actually forces you then to go back to the Buddha and say, this has to be my final refuge, because otherwise you are kind of going to despair. It's going to be very hard otherwise. So I'm afraid that I don't have too much to say to that question, but to thank you anyway. It's an interesting question, isn't it? These kind of things, how these things work. Dearest Ajahn, that's a good start. How can we recognize the relationship between piti and sukha and kindfulness for liberation from suffering here? Obviously it is helpful in its own right. Yeah, I mean, if you feel a lot of happiness, that is a relief from suffering already, and that has a value. And so all of these mental qualities that we build up, whether it's mindfulness or kindness or whatever, have a value in their own right, simply because they are in themselves a relief from the suffering of the world. If you feel joy, happiness, you are much more resilient. You have an inner kind of refuge within yourself. This is what the Buddha says we should have. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, he talks about being an island unto yourself, a refuge unto yourself, and he defines that as the practice of the 4 Satipatthanas. And those Satipatthanas, they include all of these qualities that you're talking about here, the piti, the sukha, etc., etc. So that is the refuge, because you have an inner refuge. The external world cannot touch you so much anymore. And even your own body, you can deal better with the pain, you can deal better with everything in life if you have more of these qualities. So in that sense, they are already a kind of a helpful for the liberation from suffering. But what is also interesting about these things is, of course, that they are also the path to liberation. There is no path to liberation without these qualities. Happiness begets happiness. And that is kind of what is so fascinating about the teaching of the Buddha. In the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 85, when the Buddha talks to Prince Bodhi, in that sutta, the Buddha says that before my awakening, I too, Prince Bodhi says to him, but surely it is through suffering that you achieve happiness. And the Buddha replies, I too, before my awakening, thought that you achieve happiness through suffering. But that was a mistake. That was before the awakening. That is when he was doing all the ascetic practices. After his awakening, it was happiness begets happiness. You just have to define happiness in the right way. The right kind of happiness leads to more happiness. The happiness that comes from living well, from knowing that you have a sense of self-worth because you live well, because you have compassion for people or whatever. That sort of happiness leads to more happiness down the track. There are certain kind of happiness that obviously lead in the wrong way, but these happinesses lead in the right way. And that is such a, I don't know, there's something very, very compelling about that. The majority of kind of world religions, you don't really know what's going to happen after you die. You kind of have this uncertainty. You go through life, it's all miserable, but if you believe in God, then you'll be fine, or something like that. But that is not the Buddha's teachings. It is always something positive along the way. You know if you're making progress. You know if you're heading the right way. Everything is really about these positive experiences. And so this is kind of really, again, it's quite unique in many ways in the history of religion. And of course, then finally, the awakening experience itself is an extremely happy experience. It is this kind of, you see the Buddha after his awakening. He talks about sitting at the foot of the various trees. This is found in the Udana and also in the Vinaya Pitaka. He sits at the foot of the one of the Nigroda trees, the Ajapala Nigroda, the goatherd's banyan tree, at the foot of the Bodhi tree, at the foot of the Rajayatana tree, I think it's called. So various trees. And he sits there for 7 days experiencing the bliss of liberation. Just sitting down. And it says ekang palankang. Ekang palankang basically means like one posture, one cross-legged posture. In other words, he doesn't move for 7 days. And so it's bliss upon bliss upon bliss until you reach the ultimate bliss, which is the awakening itself. That is the path. So all these things are absolutely so important. Kindfulness, kindfulness is more the attitude. You are kind, and from that kindness and mindfulness together, this is kind of this beautiful Ajahn Brahm word coined by Ajahn Brahm. And so this. That is a little bit different, because that's actually what you do, and then the result is piti and sukha. But very important. And one of the reasons for coining that term, kindfulness, is that mindfulness is often talked about without sila, and that is so lacking. It doesn't really give the full idea what it's about. One of the main purposes of having sati, mindfulness, is precisely so we can purify our conduct. Okay, dear Ajahn, why practice Satipatthana when Anapanasati on its own leads all the way to liberation? Is it Satipatthana or something else? Satipatthana, I think that's what it says, a little bit unclear. When Anapanasati leads all its way to awakening. Well, the reason is because Anapanasati is Satipatthana. There is no distinction between them. Yeah, you are actually practicing Satipatthana by practicing Anapanasati. Yeah, so this is just one way of doing it. There is more to Satipatthana. Yeah, you have all the body contemplations in there, the 31 parts of the body, the 4 elements, the cemetery contemplations, and they can be useful because sometimes the reason why Anapanasati stagnates is because you're holding on to something. Yeah, it's almost always because you're holding on to something, and that would always be somehow the realm of the 5 senses. And so by doing a bit of body contemplation, loosening your attachment to the body a little bit, then that may deepen the anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing. So it can lead on its own all the way to awakening, but it is likely that you will need some supports from other practices. Some metta practice is good. Some contemplation of the body is good. Death contemplation, incredibly useful to get you started with the anapanasati. Some general contemplation of impermanence, because impermanence is like is kind of the foundational characteristic of the 3 characteristics. Impermanence is the one that makes you also understand dukkha and also anatta. So understanding impermanence is important. I'm going to talk more about that later on this retreat. So we need to bring in some other things as well, because few people can just do anapanasati. But that is like the mainstay usually. The Buddha himself used mindfulness of breathing to reach awakening, and he talks about it a lot in the suttas. Okay. Dear Ajahn, do thoughts keep on coming till appearance of the nimitta? When do thoughts disappear during meditation? They disappear gradually. So sometimes you can be the mind can be incredibly busy and run all over the place, and it's just a kind of complete havoc and madness inside. That is one kind of thought, and then then it calms down. So there's less thought. The thoughts slow down a little bit, and then the thoughts you start to have gaps between the thoughts. They're like moments of peace, and then the thoughts come again. And this takes a long time for the thoughts to disappear absolutely completely. And that at the nimitta stage, then normally there will be no more thoughts at that point. Maybe occasional stray thoughts, I don't know, but it's basically thoughts tend to destroy the nimitta. And so at that point, the mind is clear. Certainly when it comes to the jhanas, no thoughts are possible at all at that point. And so it is a gradual thing. What I recommend, this is one of the biggest hindrances on the path of meditation, obviously. The first thing to do is try to understand what kind of thoughts do you have? What is the main thing? What are you thinking about? Is it about the future? Is it about projects that you have to do? Is it about problems you need to solve? Is it fantasies about how you're going to indulge after this retreat is over? This is in the suttas. Everything I say is from the suttas. This is in the suttas. There's a Lady Visakha, she goes to the Buddha, and she asks the Buddha, how should you practice the uposatha? And the Buddha said, there's 3 ways of practicing the uposatha. One is the uposatha of some certain dodgy ascetics. I can't remember the name now. When these ascetics, they have this idea that, well, within kind of 100-meter radius, I will have no ill will towards anyone within 100 meters radius. Outside of that, it's okay, but not within the 100-meter radius. That's kind of one way of practicing the uposatha. The other way is the one who kind of practice the uposatha and they meditate, and when they meditate, they think, when this uposatha is finished, I'm going to eat this and do that and entertain myself like this and sleep on the bed like that and really enjoy myself. This is kind of the wrong way of doing it. And then finally, the right way of practicing the uposatha is to practice metta meditation while you're doing the uposatha. I think that's the way that sutta goes. Again, it's a bit blurred sometimes, the exact content. By the way, dear Rupa, Those suttas were those Brahmins who were 120 years older, yeah? Anguttara Nikaya 3 is 51 and 52. And 52, yeah. They are the ones, yeah. So, so thoughts are very gradual. So try to understand your thoughts. Why are you having them? And they will tend to be of three kinds. About the past, yeah, something that quite past. Usually it's some kind of problem or something you regret. Or it could also be a longing for the past. Yeah, if you're having lots of trouble now, maybe you long for those golden days when everything was wonderful, and so now it is so miserable. And that is kind of an attachment to the past. So that can also happen. And then there's the future. The future is usually about planning or sorting out or looking towards something in the future. And then there is fantasizing, just general mind is fantasizing about things which is not really in the future or the past. It's just kind of whatever. The mind is just kind of going all over the place. And there's different ways of dealing with the thought depending on what it is. So if it is about the future, then as I mentioned before, then remember the future is not that interesting. All those things that you have to do in the future, all those problems that you think you have to resolve, you have been resolving those problems for lifetimes. And you're still resolving those same problems. This is probably why you're still here, because you're still resolving those problems. So put those problems to one side. It is far more productive to do the spiritual practice, to make yourself peaceful, and then very often you come out of that state of peace, and you just know the answer. Now I know the answer. Other times the mind just goes round and round in circles. Have you noticed that? How sometimes you have a problem, it goes around in circles, it doesn't get any solution. And still, even though you never get the solution, you still think the same thought again. Even though you know it just goes around in the same circle. You're hoping that this time it won't hurt. This time the chili will be sweet. The chili is never sweet. Yeah. That's the problem. And so, better to just let it go. The future is not interesting, or rather that future is not interesting. What is interesting is the future on the spiritual path. That is what is interesting. And so, this is a simple way of kind of thinking about that. Sometimes I sit down and I tell myself, I have no future. I'm a hopeless case, I have no future. And it works, because I know that is true from a certain perspective. I don't have a future in the ordinary world. I'm not going anywhere in the ordinary world. I'm only, hopefully, that's kind of my plan anyway, is only to go towards more peace, more quiet, more extinguishment, more disappearing. That's kind of my plan, which hopefully reality will measure up to that. That's the plan. And so the future is not interesting. Or that ordinary future we think about is not interesting. And the same thing with the past. If the past is about, as I mentioned yesterday, about problems, letting go by forgiving is really the way towards that. And as for general fantasies, well, that is what the breath meditation is about. Breath meditation is really, its purpose, according to the suttas, is to overcome the thinking mind. Vitak upacheda is one of the purposes, according to the suttas, of anapanasati. So keep on, just enjoy what you have. Don't worry too much about knowing exactly when the nimittas appear. Remember, there's many, many good things on the path before the nimittas. Enjoy every step. If you enjoy every little moment of peace, every little moment of joy, anything that is kind of better than you had before, that very fact that you enjoy that means you can be content with that. That is very often where the meditation deepens. So just try to be content with whatever you have. Dear Ajahn, when we say observe the breath body, do we have to follow the breath through the nose, chest, abdomen, and then back? Many thanks. Just follow the breath. And it's not really about, it's not body contemplation, so it's not really about where you follow the breath. It is about it's about breath contemplation. So all you really have to worry about is whether you observe the breath or not. Forget about the body a little bit. Yes, it will be related to the body somehow, because that's how you know these things. But just leave the body aside and know the breath. Okay, close your eyes. In, out. You know that almost automatically without referring to the body. And so you do that, and as you do that, you become more peaceful. And when you become more peaceful, your awareness starts to expand, and you just see more. Don't worry about where exactly it is. Yeah, you can call it following it all the way. That's probably one thing that you do, but you don't have to worry about that. Some people say you just watch that one point and you see all the in and out at that point. There's many different ways this can happen. So you just stay with the breath and allow it to develop. And then this is basically what will happen. It will develop in this particular way. You just see more of it. Whether you want to or not, you just see more. Don't think too much about how to do it, because the moment you think, oh, I have to go there, you start to control. Okay, I must feel it here, then here, and coming out again, feel everything. You start to control the mind. You start to use too much will on your attention. And that amount of will on your attention means, again, that it can become too forced, not relaxed enough. So just sit back and wait, and just be with the breath, and just enjoy her. Okay, dear Bhante, thank you for your valuable teachings. Is samadhi and the jhanas the same thing? Can one get to samadhi but not get into the jhanas with metta? It is not exactly the same thing. Samadhi is broader than jhana. There are samadhis outside of the jhanas, but samma samadhi, right samadhi, is always defined at the 4 jhanas. So if you want the real deal, then the 4 jhanas is what you, where you want. Eventually, you hopefully you can achieve this, or you can get to that point. And if you can't, well, at least you're going to have lots of fun on the way here. Yeah. So, but samadhi is defined in the suttas as chittassa ekaggata, one-pointedness of mind. And one-pointedness of mind is also defined as avikitta chitta. Avikitta means non-distracted mind. Vikitta is like being kind of all over the place. And so that can be relative. Yeah, you can be reasonably non-distracted or completely non-distracted. If you are reading a book or something, or reading a sutta, and you're fully one-pointed on that sutta, it is a kind of samadhi, but it's not samma samadhi, because you're not distracted at all, non-distraction, so that's kind of samadhi, but it's a very early stage of samadhi. So whenever you're fully focused, it's a kind of samadhi. Then there is the samadhi you can have during walking meditation. You follow the motion of the feet, for example. That can also become very deep, but is not as deep as what you usually get if you follow the breath. The breath tends to lead to more powerful samadhi. But it's a kind of samadhi, you're just staying with the feet. Your mind is not going anywhere else. And so there are degrees of samadhi, and these are mentioned in the suttas. As we shall see shortly, in the Majjhima Nikaya 128, the Corruption Sutta, Upakilesa Sutta, the Buddha calls that also, he calls that a samadhi when you have the light and the forms. That's also a kind of samadhi. So in other words, the nimitta, when you come to that stage, is a kind of samadhi already. So all of these things are samadhis, and they're all useful, but they are not the full samma samadhi that is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. These are preliminary stages. Then there are also samadhis that are on the other side of the jhanas. You have the samadhis of the immaterial attainments. They're also samadhis, very deep states. And there are even other kinds of samadhis beyond this. That, the samadhis where you are focusing on the 5 khandhas and you're trying to kind of gain maybe some insight after a jhana maybe. You're just staying with the 5 khandhas. That's also a kind of samadhi if your mind isn't distracted and suddenly bang and something happens. So there's a large number. But the most important samadhis on the path is the 4 jhanas. So when the suttas just say samadhi without any explanation, your default assumption is that it means the jhanas. That's the default. I once did a count of the number of times jhana is mentioned in the 4 main nikayas, Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, and Gutta Nikaya. It's mentioned over 1,000 times. It's like 1,000 times. It's like every few pages you come across jhana. So it's everywhere. You look at some of the other samadhis, there are samadhis called like the Sunyata Samadhi or Animita Samadhi. These are slightly different kinds of samadhi. They're mentioned like 5 or 10 times in all the suttas. So you can see there's an enormous difference. One type of samadhi is very marginal. If it is that marginal, it is not really significant. It doesn't really matter so much. We shouldn't focus on that. Yes?
You mentioned one-pointedness of the mind, which is a form of a samadhi, non-distracted, like when you read the book. I think that is the definition that is used in Thailand in everyday life. For instance, have samadhi while listening to me. He is reading this samadhi.
Okay.
And that's why sometimes it's very difficult for some Thai people to really understand samadhi. Because samadhi is an everyday word in a very low definition.
Right, okay.
May I ask what sutta you refer to so that I can go?
Well, the chittassa ekaggata, one-pointedness of mind, as a definition, this is the definition of samadhi, I think it's found in the Mahachattarisaka Sutta, Majjhima Nikāya 117. I think it is in there.
In 17?
MN 117.
Okay.
Yeah. And avikitta chitta, I think that, I'm not sure where that is defined, where that is found, I can't really remember that. But that is a very interesting point, and this is not just for Thai speakers, but also for Sinhala speakers, it's the same problem. And that is that words are very similar in Sinhala compared to Pali. But in Sinhala, they have acquired a slightly different meaning. And so you need to be aware of that, because otherwise you will misread the suttas because you think it has the same meaning as it has in your language, as in Thai, for example. So I think all cultures that are very imbued with Buddhism will have similar kind of issues where vocabulary, you need to be careful how vocabulary is used.
In linguistic terms, it is called false friends.
False friends, right, okay.
They are not real friends, and that's the difficulty for translators.
Papamita. Is that false friends? Bad friends? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand what you mean. That makes sense. False friends. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Venerable.
I think you mentioned Vikittan and Avikitta.
Yeah.
But what is Sankittan? So Sankittan, Chittan, and Vikittan, Chittan comes in Chittan.
Yeah. That's right.
I don't know what.
Yeah. Sankitta usually means when the mind is contracted, it's translated as a contracted mind, and it usually refers to something when when you're tired and the mind is kind of slothful. My understanding is it means more the mind of which is lethargic and tired and that sort of thing. Yeah, maybe depression as well. Yeah, sure, that's also contracted maybe. Yeah, and if you are depressed, you tend to be quite lethargic. These things often go together because you don't have much energy. A depressed person is lacking in energy. That's one of the things, right? Distracted mind, non-distracted. Yeah. So that's why avikitta is a synonymous with chittassa ekaggata. Yeah. Yes, Letty.
Yeah. I'm curious about if there's any similarity between near-death experiences and samadhi.
Okay, samadhi and near-death experiences. Well, this is, I get one of those things is this tunnel vision. Yeah, so Ajahn Brahmali always talks about that. And when you go through the tunnel, there's a light at the end. Ajahn Brahmali always claims that's the nimitta. That's what kind of he says. And maybe it is in some cases, maybe even many cases. I'm not entirely sure if it is always the case, however. I think this tunnel vision may be a broader thing that, a lot of people see. So I think that is one of the similarities. Venerable, please. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, because you said Samma Samadhi. So Samma Samadhi requires the right view, right? But near-death experiences happen to everybody, so they can still have like a very deep state of mind. Like the mind goes through that, and they could have like a Jhana-like state, but we won't call it Jhana in the Buddhist context, because Jhana is not there in the Hindu. too, like it's a very powerful mind today, and you need person stuff. So there will be something similar from what I get there, but it's not Samma. Because I mean Samma Samadhi also could happen if I'm a practicing person at the time of Shaitan, because they also say like there is an opportunity for people who are practicing really well to become a stream winner sometimes at time of death. And even Jhana Ajahn Brahmali also mentions who've been practicing Jhana and not becoming not yet Jhana becomes there. So for those it could be, but for others it's not something
Yeah. That's a good point. That Samma Samadhi always requires right views. That's a good point. Yeah. Yes, Venerable.
When I was in Burma, I had big arguments about momentary concentration.
Yeah.
Because momentary concentration is actually not deep enough, not stable enough, and not long enough to actually produce a profound change.
Yeah.
So we are also sometimes in the West now that we momentary concentration is good enough. All I want to say is be careful.
Yeah. Ajahn Brahm calls it an oxymoron. The Kanika Samadhi that's the contradiction in terms. Yeah, because Samadhi is a prolonged state, and if it's momentary, it's by definition not prolonged. So it's kind of a bit strange. Yeah. So it's a commentarial term. It's not really found in the sutta, as it's barely. I think even in the Visuddhimagga it is barely found. In fact, if you look up, I think even the number of usages of the word Kanika Samadhi in almost all Pali texts is actually negligible. It occurs something like 20 times in all Pali texts. There's also Vipassana Jhana. Vipassana Jhana also occurs like very, very rarely, but it occurs in certain sub-commentaries, but it's like 10 times in all the Pali text altogether. And then you have the jhanas that occur 1,000 times just in the four Nikayas. If you take all Pali texts, it probably occurs 10,000 times or something. Yeah. And so you have 10 times, 20 times versus 20 or 10,000 times. And yet, somehow, people talk about these things as if they matter. And so it's kind of out of proportion. I think this because, things that are rare are interesting precisely because they are rare. Yeah, people don't talk about it. So you can bring out something new that no one else is talking about. And so then you kind of create something out of it. It's like the Visuddhimagga. The Visuddhimagga is based on Majjhima Nikaya 24, the Rattavanita Sutta, relay coaches. And that is a very obscure sutta, which the stages that you find there are only found in that sutta, apart from, I think, Sangiti Sutta or something like that. So it's very rare. And then you create this whole manual meditation based on something that is very rare.
Also in Burma, the teaching is government controlled. They're not allowed to actually teach it.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah, that's, yeah. It's true. Okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, it's government control. That's interesting, isn't it? The Buddhist teachings are under the... So, yeah. Okay. So let's carry on. So, dear Ajahn, what is the difference between Cetana and Sankhara? Thank you. Cetana means basically the will or intention. Sankhara can have different meanings depending on the context. But the main context of Sankhara, it means the same thing as Cetana. And the main context is the five aggregates. Yeah, you have Sankhara Kanda and dependent origination, where you have Sankhara, you have Avidya Paccaya Sankhara, Sankhara Paccaya Vijnana, etc. And so those are the two main contexts, and in both of those it means will. And you know that. You can know that because Sankhara is actually defined, and it is defined in the Kanda Samyutta. It says that Rupa Kanda is Rupa Sanchetana. It is defined that as quite literally. So it's quite obvious that this is what it means. And so this is the most important connection between the two. But sometimes Sankhara has a different meaning. And one of the most important meanings of Sankhara, apart from the will, apart from intention, is Sankhara as a compounded thing. as a phenomenon in the world. And so you have expressions like sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha, and in those cases it means all compounded things or all phenomena in the world are impermanent, or they are dukkha, they are suffering here. So it's kind of a strange word. It's like sankhara as the will is what creates the future, right? This is how you make karma. And then the result of that karma is the phenomena in the world that you experience. And so sankhara is both the creative force and the result of that creative force. That's why they use the word formation sometimes to translate sankhara, because the idea is that formation, it forms, but it is also the formed. That's kind of the idea. Of course, no one understands that when you read formation. It's impossible to get that when you read it, but that's kind of the idea behind that translation. And it's so obscure that it doesn't make any sense to keep on translating like that. And so, but remember, basically sankhara is chaitana. It's basically, that's the easiest way to think about it. Yeah, so these are sankharas that create merit, demerit, or are neutral, Anenja. Yeah, so it's chaitana, which is positive, negative, and neutral. Yeah. That's abhisankhara, but it's the same thing. Abhisankhara and sankhara is the same thing here. It's just a prefix. Sometimes when you compound them, they add prefixes. That's why you have sankchetana as well, not just chaitana. And sometimes the prefixes have no meaning. So it's just kind of how language is. Language kind of likes to add things. It's kind of sometimes a bit random here. Say again? Anenja, abhisankhara. Well, Anenja is imperturbable, right? And so Anenja is usually, in the suttas, it is defined as the fourth jhana, or the two first of the immaterial attainments. They're called the Anenja attainments. And so Anenja, abhisankhara, will be a volition that creates those states. Yeah, so that's what I think it means. It's a volition that creates. So in other words, if you want to enter the fourth jhana and you're directing your mind towards the fourth jhana, that is an Anenja abhisankhara. You're directing your mind in that direction, or towards the material attainments. Something like that.
The reason there was Ajahn Brahm's days, this kind of, and your nature sister of for these states.
Yeah.
And also Ajahn Brahms also kind of will them to get it.
Right.
Then there was a bit of a problem to explain that.
Yeah, so there are, right. So the idea there is that to enter any jhana state or any state of samadhi, you have to direct the mind towards it. And that direction of the mind, before you enter, right, that direction of the mind, that is the Anenja abhisankhara. So it's like, you can, for example, before you enter jhana, you can decide which jhana you want to enter. Yeah, you can decide first jhana, second jhana, third jhana. This is part of what it means to have mastery over jhanas. You can decide which one you want to enter, how long you want to stay in there, when you want to come out, all of these kinds of things. This is part of the idea of mastery. And so that is, you set up the mind beforehand. And then that momentum of the mind then looks after the rest of it. So you come out exactly when you want in these things. Yeah.
This is the predetermination of the condition.
Yeah. Okay. So dear Ajahn, today we heard how rapture all the way to freedom cannot be done by an act of will and depends on ethics as a vital condition. So is it the case that ethics is the only thing that can be done by an act of will? And does the sequence of causality need to be pushed back further to the Kalyana Mitta and wise reflection as the vital conditions, with nothing else being able to be done by an act of will? In that event, now that we've heard the Dhamma, does our awakening literally depend on the strength of our reflection on the Dhamma? It does, yeah. This is exactly right. That's basically the truth. Yeah, it depends on the strength of your reflections on the Dhamma. And I will talk about this later on when we come to the Dhammanusati, the recollection of the Dhamma. But one of the ideas is to allow the Dhamma to express itself through you rather than you doing the path. That's a beautiful way of thinking about the practice. So there are two kinds of will in a sense here. One is the will that is coming from the self. Another will is the will that comes from the Dhamma. The Dhamma kind of compels you. And so there's always going to be some degree of will, because otherwise you can't do anything, right? So the will that we really want to get rid of is the I-directed will, the me-directed will coming from me. I will do the meditation. I will create the jhanas. I will be still. That is the biggest problem. But the will that comes from the Dhamma, which is, okay, now you have to direct your mind in this way. You have to have a bit more metta. Yeah, metta is right here. So you kind of nudge the mind towards metta. It's like the Dhamma is speaking through you. That gentle will that happens there is acceptable even during the process of meditation. But it's almost no will. It's mostly just sitting back and observing. And then the Dhamma reminds you, okay, now I have to nudge the mind a bit to get it in the right track. Yeah. So, but yes, everything is really automatic. Yeah, everything is a conditioned process. And so whether you become enlightened or not is kind of really random. And that is so scary. Yeah, it's really scary. We just don't know what conditioning is going to hit us next and lead us astray, and you never come back to the Dhamma again. I think about the way I became a Buddhist monk. It's kind of really, really random. It's just, so I grew up in ice and snow in Norway, and it is literally just lots of ice and snow. I skied a lot when I was young, like a lot. I was kind of really big on like cross-country skiing, not some downhill skiing as well, but mostly cross-country skiing. That was kind of my main thing, and I never heard about Buddhism. I never knew anyone who was from Asia. There was no one from Asia in Norway at that time. There was no immigrants really at all. And so I had no contact with anything except for, ordinary Norwegian society. People weren't even religious. There wasn't even much Christianity. People were becoming atheists faster than you could, really quickly. And so I grew up in a non-religious family. And so how did I end up becoming a Buddhist? And it's kind of random. I had a kind of natural attraction to travel to Asia. I don't know why. And so I was on this exchange program. And so I came to Japan and I saw some monasteries. I thought, wow, this is really cool monasteries. Yeah, monks and things, large Buddha statues. I got my first book on Buddhism and I read that. And it was kind of, wow, this is familiar. Then I come back to Norway. My best friend, he kind of chucked me a book and said, here, read this. And it was about mindfulness of breathing. And so I tried it out. I had some nice results. This is kind of how this thing kind of came about. And then eventually, after studying in London, not being very happy with my studies, I decided to go and visit a monastery. I thought it might be cool to visit a monastery. And so I had no idea where to go. I didn't know anything, at all. And so I took out the white pages, the directory. Remember the old white pages? And so I went to BUDD, Buddhist Society of London. Okay, cool. So I called up the Buddhist Society of London. I said, oh, where is the nearest monastery, please? And I said, oh, Amravati and Chitra's monastery. And so I went there. That's kind of how it started. It's kind of really, really random. And so I ended up in these monasteries, and they are quite nice. These are Ajahn Chah monasteries. I was very lucky to kind of get straight to the really good places right away. And then while I was there, I got this underground recording of Ajahn Brahm, right? And then I got this underground recording. I thought, wow, this is the best stuff I have heard. And so I just picked up the phone, called Ajahn Brahm, and said, can I come to Australia? And he said, who are you? And then I said, oh, I'm so-and-so. Okay, you can come to Australia. Ajahn Brahm is really nice like that. Okay, sure, you can come, no problem. Most people would be really skeptical, but he has this incredibly open attitude. So I came to Australia, and this is why I'm here today. It sounds really random, doesn't it? Right, you have read Why I'm Buddhist Monk, right? That goes even further. But some of those things are not in there, I think. But so this is how I kind of ended up in Australia, and this is where I have been ever since. But is it really random? And this is the thing afterwards, after the fact, it may look like that, but actually there were forces inside of me that were pointing me in that direction all the time. I don't actually think it was random. I think it was almost as if it had to be that way. That if it hadn't happened in that way, it would have happened in some other way. Yeah, there is some attraction there. There is some history, or call it karma if you like, with Ajahn Brahm that kind of drew me in that direction. And so I ended up the way it was. So this is the thing. So we don't really know what we're doing. These forces just compel us in a certain way. And the more you understand that, the more you understand how important it is to allow yourself to be conditioned by these teachings. If you realize that there's something special about these teachings, allow yourself to be conditioned by them to the max, because this is how you're going to be heading in the right direction. And Buddhism is really an extraordinary teaching. Sometimes we forget how extraordinary it is in comparison to almost anything else that exists in the world, in terms of philosophies or religions or spiritual paths or psychologies or whatever. It is really, really, really special. It has to do with a human being who is at the core. I mentioned that earlier today. It is a religion that is basically naturalistic. It is about how natural phenomena in the world work. There's nothing outside of natural phenomena. It has all of these elements to it that kind of makes it very, very, very different from anything else. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, dear Ajahn, the teaching on the natural conditions of the practice this morning has got me to think about my experience attending Ajahn Brahm's retreats with the Singapore group at hotels. A few times I would have good but short meditation around the last 2 days of the retreats. I guess, though, I am not good at stilling the mind, always restless. Because I had kept precepts and enjoyed inspiring talks, my mind naturally calmed down, and as a result I experienced a glimpse of what you may call nimittas of a funny kind. Okay. Is my analysis of my experience correct? Sounds like, I can't see anything kind of wrong with this. So you have a restless mind. Okay, so you need to investigate why your mind is restless. And when you figure that out, then you can maybe calm it down a little bit, probably because you are too involved maybe with worldly things that interest you. Remember, those worldly things are never going to get you anywhere interesting. It's good to do nice things, but don't hold on to those nice things. That is the difficult thing. That is what we have to do. Do good karma, do lots of good things, but when you sit down to meditate, forget about them. That's kind of the trick. So you had some success because of keeping precepts and inspiring talks, yes. Now you have to learn the right view, and the right view is even more powerful in calming you down than the on top, in addition to the precepts or whatever. So you had a funny kind of nimitta. I'm not sure what that was. Maybe Donald Duck or something. Ajahn Brahm talks about having funny nimittas, kind of cartoon figures and things arising during meditation. So this can happen to people. Okay. Dear Ajahn, Buddha went into first jhana under the rose apple, not the rosewood, but the rose apple tree, maybe same thing. Why did he have to recall it to become enlightened when he had already attained the 8 jhanas? Many thanks. Okay, so this is one of those questions that is very hard to be sure about the right answer. But the most obvious answer is that when he was practicing under Alara, Kalama, and Udrakaramaputra, who were his 2 Brahmanical teachers, before his awakening, remember, with that came a whole package of ideas, of doctrines, of teachings. And because they looked like they were Brahmanical teachers, the Brahmanical ideas would have been included with those teachings. And the Brahmanical ideas are about achieving an eternal reality, an eternal mind, or some sort of eternity afterwards based on that. This is like Brahman, Brahman and Atman being one, and these kind of things. And those ideas existed already at the time of the Buddha. You can see that in places like the Brahmajala Sutta, the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya. It talks about the self and the world standing like a mountain peak, never deteriorating, never going anywhere. So this is kind of this sort of idea. And so because it came with this package of other ideas, it would have been very difficult for the Buddha to see the jhanas or those immaterial attainments apart from those ideas, because they were bound up with the wrong view. And because they're bound up with the wrong view, obviously they don't lead to awakening. And so because of that, he would have to kind of get his mind out of that and then think back to the earlier childhood experience. Of course, when you are a child, you don't have there's no philosophical packaging to those experiences. Is much more pure. It's a pure experience. And so you can see it devoid of all of those philosophical ideas. And I think that's the kind of the obvious reason to me why that was the case. And I think that is reasonable. Sometimes people think, but it was the Buddha to be. The Buddha surely smart enough to see through. Well, the Buddha is conditioned like everyone. He has similar kind of problems like everyone else. And so I think that, I still think that is quite possible. There are other possible explanations. One of them is that the attainments that he had under Alara Kalama and Udakaramaputa were not actually the immaterial attainments, but some lesser attainment. There is some evidence to support that. I'm not going to go into that now, but there is. So there are some other possible hypotheses as well. But that is the main one. So, If you want to kind of drill into these questions more, you're very welcome to do so now or at some other time. Yeah, please. Yeah.
He didn't have right view yet.
Yeah.
So, but he still practiced those jhanas, and even at the night of his awakening, he went through the jhanas.
Yeah.
But do you think he still had some forms of right view to get there?
I think the right view emerged gradually. And it emerged out of the fact that he tried all of these things and they were all dead ends. And as he saw they were dead ends, he would have abandoned those views. So when he saw that the samadhi under Alara Kalama and Udakaramaputa was a dead end, it didn't reach to awakening, he would have abandoned those views, the kind of eternalist views or whatever. Then he did the ascetic practices, would abandon that view, that leads to awakening. And gradually he would be honing in on what actually was important. And then when he, I think this is kind of also very important, is during his awakening, or over however long that took to do that, the first thing he did was to recall his past lives. And that would have been an insight into dukkha. That's because he couldn't understand dukkha in the ordinary sense in the five khandhas, because that's what awakening is about. So prior to that, you have to have a preliminary understanding of the Four Noble Truths, and seeing kind of the horror of rebirth. That would have been part of that, which then eventually enabled him to reach awakening. So it's a gradual emergence of right view.
Previous teachers,
They
had those kinds of generated deep states, but we not
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I would say, So, all right. Dear Ajahn, what advice would you give to someone who, despite their best efforts, is losing confidence in the practice, path, and themselves with gratitude? Wow, there's no need. The reason you're losing confidence perhaps is because you don't feel the results of the path, And the best way to kind of have that confidence is to observe some of those people who have taken this path a long way. I just love observing Ajahn Brahm. To me, he is like the example of someone who has taken this path a long, long way. Someone whose mind always inclines towards samadhi. Someone who just sits there, doesn't say very much when you're with him. Someone who has an enormous amount of kindness or whatever. Someone who has all of these qualities. And when you see that, when you see these people in the world, you realize that there is something there, something is going on, something is possible. And so when it's like very useful to have the living example. Just having the sutras is not enough usually, because that gives you the recipe, but you don't know the product. The product is these people, who kind of come out of the other end. And so don't lose confidence. I mean, do you think the Buddha was awakened or not? Or do you think the Buddha was just an ordinary person? Read the sutras, and it's almost like even that actually is enough to give you confidence in awakening. There's something going on there which is extraordinary. There's something about these teachings that are really unique in the world. And so don't lose confidence. What you need to do, if you stop making progress, you need to look at what is the blockage in your life. What is stopping you? There's something there which is blocking the progress. You need to be honest with yourself. You need to have that, be brave and actually see yourself for who you really are. And you will see blockages if you do that. Yes, please.
Somebody who lacks confidence in practice, strong recommend you go to nursing home once a week.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. So that reminds you of the future, right? This is what the future holds for every one of us. When you see go to the nursing home. Okay. Good. Yeah. It is. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So everybody's sitting there waiting for the last minute, and everybody's so lost.
Yeah.
So lost. And every time I see that, I go home. Naturally, I'll become
like every time I have a chance.
Yeah.
I'm still with my brain.
Old age is dukkha. Old age is dukkha. Yeah, that's what you see. Exactly. Yeah. It's very helpful. Yeah. It gives you a sense of urgency, and now is the time to do things. Yeah. We have actually. You're from Vietnam originally, right? Background. We have a Vietnamese couple who drive us in Perth. They're a very, very nice couple. They always drive us to the airport and do all of these things. And sometimes I ask them, are we asking you too much? Because we're always asking you to drive everywhere. And at one point they said, oh no, you're not asking too much, because we're just sitting at home waiting to die. That's what they said. And I thought, okay, in that case, please. So, and it was kind of, but it's nice though, when you become a pensioner and you have that time, you use it for good purpose, you drive, and they are very, very generous and very good people. Okay, so in that case, we will ask you endlessly, right, for helping out. So losing confidence in yourself. Remember that self that self is the problem. There is no such thing as that self is just an illusion. It's just kind of getting in the way. There is a Noble Eightfold Path, and that Noble Eightfold Path works. Got nothing to do with you. You just have to get out of the way. That's the problem. And if you lose confidence in yourself, that becomes an obstacle on that path. So there's no need to. This path just works. And so you ask yourself where your blockage is. Do you need more right view? Do you need to purify your metta and compassion? Have you got enough compassion in the world? Are you watching the news too much, which makes you upset about things that are happening? These sort of things, if you watch the news all the time and you see all the misery in the world, it's very easy to get angry. All these bad actors everywhere. So cut down on the news consumption. Throw out your iPhone. Chuck it in the river, because you don't want to see that iPhone ever again. It is a problem. So you have to really be. Sometimes you have to be quite. You have to take drastic actions, and then hopefully you can make a difference, and things may start to happen. But the path works. That's kind of the point, and you just have to allow it to work on you. Okay, last question for tonight. Dear Ajahn, thank you for the teachings and your humor. Okay, great. Can you speak a bit more about the role of self-compassion in our daily practice of Dhamma and meditation? I feel I need more self-compassion, but it's so hard to do. Why is this the case? Blessings. Yes, self-compassion is very, very useful because you give yourself a break. You understand the limits of what you can do, right? And sometimes you try really hard and you fail regardless. And okay, it's just life. Life is difficult. Life has limits. And why am I expecting myself to be able to do the impossible? So self-compassion arises out of two things. And these are things I've already spoken about. First of all, it arises out of the fact that life is painful very often. Life is full of dukkha. And this is true for everyone, absolutely everyone. It's the way it is. And once you understand that, then you understand it's actually not your fault that there is suffering and pain. This is just the nature of existence. When you break a leg, you didn't do anything wrong. That's the nature of legs. They break. When you get divorced, it's not because you did anything wrong, it's because that's the nature of life. You get divorced, yeah? I've never been divorced, but that's what they say anyway. And even if someone like in your family commits suicide or something, I had a friend, this is kind of really, most people consider this very tragic. I had a close friend of mine, one of my best friends, his son and his wife committed suicide. That's kind of extraordinary. And he's still actually doing all right, yeah? But this also is natural. Yeah, sometimes people commit suicide, and sometimes it has nothing to do with you. It's just that people have a certain proclivity inside of themselves that lead them in that direction. Most of the time, there's nothing we can do. You look for flaws in your conduct, but actually, regardless of what you have done, it is very likely to would have happened in exactly the same way. And so, this is just life. Yeah, nature is life is dukkha. And this is the first thing here. And the other thing is to understand the limits of your ability to do anything about it. Yeah, very often we can't. Very often, it is again the fact that we are conditioned in a certain way. We are what we are. And that sense of being trapped in your conditioning, the sense of being trapped in your personality, the sense of being trapped by all of these things around us means that there is nothing you can do, and then the only thing you can really do is to have compassion for yourself. And strangely enough, once you have that sense of self-compassion, actually a lot of that feeling of entrapment and problems, it actually dissipates, because at least you can have that sense of, okay, yeah, I deserve compassion. I'm a good person. I do the right things in the world. Okay, I'm at least going to look after myself. And so self-compassion, I think, is incredibly important, and it kind of opens up a sense of gentleness and softness, and it is the highway also to have compassion towards others. One of the things is that it is really impossible to divide between you and others. If you think, sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I have got lots of compassion for others, but not towards myself." Well, if that is the case, then even the compassion for others may not be the real compassion, because it is an understanding of the human condition, and the human condition is the same for you as it is for others. That's where the real compassion emerges from. Okay, that's it for tonight. So there you are. Excellent. Let's do the Arahang Samma Sambuddha together. Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhaṃ Bhagavaṃ Abhivādemi Svākatu Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghaṃ